the very beginning of the story, we see a gloomy, rain-soaked city. At first glance, it seems quite normal and ordinary, but a little later it becomes clear that this is no ordinary rain. Through some unknown, strange power, wherever this rainwater touches, an unbreakable wall forms instantly. In this very city lives an ordinary family, the head of the household, Jason, his wife Anne, and their two children, Graham and their little daughter Ruth. When the pouring rain began outside, Jason and Anne thought it was just a normal thunderstorm, but a little while later, when they tried to open the door and go outside, they realized they were trapped. The doors and windows had become so tightly sealed that it was as if the entire house had been permanently locked down by some invisible, powerful glue or magical seal. Jason initially thought it was a simple problem, picked up an iron rod, and struck hard to try to break the window glass. But then a miraculous thing happened. After the blow, a faint crack appeared in the glass, but as soon as it touched the rainwater coming from outside, the crack miraculously sealed itself back together instantly and became 100 times stronger than bulletproof glass. Seeing Jason's repeated blows and the glass automatically mending itself in this unbelievable way, his wife Anne and children Graham and Ruth shuddered in extreme terror. A tense and frightening atmosphere gripped the entire house. Just then, a young neighbor woman was seen outside the window, getting soaked in the rain. Hearing Jason and Anne's cries for help, the girl rushed forward to assist them, but the outer walls and door of the house had become so hardened that the girl could find no way to get inside. Seeing no other option, the girl quickly ran off to seek help from the police. Seeing someone go for police help gave Jason and his family a temporary sense of relief, but none of them knew what extreme tragedy awaited their fate later. Days passed one after another, but there was no trace of the girl who had gone for help. The rain didn't stop, and the strange hardened seal on the doors and windows didn't loosen even slightly. Looking around at the neighbors, Jason realized this wasn't just their problem alone. Every house in the entire area had been trapped the exact same way. Jason wasn't one to give up. To protect his family, he now picked up a drill machine and began trying to bore through the wall. Despite drilling with tremendous force, a small hole formed in the wall, but the very next moment, the touch of rainwater trickling in from outside sealed it smooth and hard again, just as before. After all their efforts failed, Jason and Anne realized there was no certainty how long this strange, mysterious imprisonment would last. To keep themselves alive, they made the difficult decision to carefully count and ration all the food stored in the house. Eating little by little each day, they continued their struggle to survive. Their days passed this way, through extreme uncertainty. But one day, little Ruth suddenly saw something strange move quickly past the other side of the window. After that, every time it rained heavily, Ruth noticed a winged or strange creature-like shape walking quickly past the window in the dim light. However, thinking it was just a child's imagination, neither Jason nor Anne, the heads of the family, took Ruth's warning seriously. Meanwhile, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Outside, there was no more sound of human civilization. Along with the ever-deepening darkness came a growing fear that the electricity would go out, yet there was no solution to this cursed rain. In the desolate, human-less silence, only the roar of the storm and the sound of water droplets hitting the floor created an eerie atmosphere in the house. Amid such a pitiful and suffocating situation, Christmas Day arrived on the calendar. Once this was a day filled with light, festivity, and joy among loved ones, but now, trapped within four walls, Jason, Anne, Graham, and Ruth were forced to celebrate the Christmas by the dim light of a single candle. But there was not a trace of joy on anyone's face. Father Jason couldn't give his children any gifts. Carrying only a heart full of sorrow and an unyielding will to survive, they observed that gloomy Christmas night. Right at that moment, a tremendous noise came from the chimney of the house, as if something heavy had come crashing down. The bone-chilling sound made the entire family tremble. Jason and Anne rushed over and saw that, because the chimney was very old, its lower part had collapsed. Seeing this, a ray of hope sparked in Jason's mind. In this dark prison where every path was blocked, this sudden collapse seemed like an unexpected message. He began to think that the chimney might now be their only way to communicate with the outside world, or escape from this completely sealed house. But a huge problem arose there. The passage inside the chimney was extremely narrow, damp, and packed with raw earth, through which it was virtually impossible for an adult body like Jason's or Anne's to pass. So seeing no other option, Jason sent his little daughter Ruth into the chimney. Holding onto a sturdy rope, Ruth slowly began climbing upward. With every step, their hearts pounded with anxiety. In the eyes of Jason and Anne flickered a new dream, of seeing outside light and air, and breathing under an open sky. But right then, a terrifying shrieking and groaning sound came from beyond the window, as if some poisonous wind from hell had crashed against the window. Hearing that horrifying sound that shook everything around, Jason hurriedly brought Ruth back down and peered outside through a gap in the curtain. What he saw made their blood run cold. They saw that the neighbor girl who had gone to seek police help so long ago had returned. but she no longer looked like an ordinary human. Her eyes were enormous and glowed with an evil light, and her body's grotesque skin and skeletal form was enough to make anyone shudder in terror. Some hellish transformation had turned her into a living corpse. Jason understood instantly that the girl was no longer human. Some unknown, cursed power or virus had completely consumed her. In fear and terror, Jason quickly pulled the curtain tightly shut again. Meanwhile, before one crisis could pass, another terrible one befell the family. Their beloved pet dog, writhing in pain in a corner of the room, suddenly fell severely ill and began whimpering in agony. The heavy air in the house now carried the scent of death. Jason understood that, due to prolonged lack of proper care and regular medication, the dog was slowly slipping toward death. More days passed, and the food stored in the house reached its final limit. Having gone without any protein-rich food for a long time, the bodies of Jason and his family were growing increasingly weak. In this situation, killing the sick dog and eating its meat became their only way to survive. But their hearts couldn't bear to kill this beloved pet of so many years. Still, faced with harsh reality and no other path, driven solely by the need to preserve their own existence, they made the painful decision with tearful eyes to kill the dog. Without wasting time, Jason processed the dog's body and stored the meat in the freezer, so it could sustain them during another extreme crisis in the future. Days continued to pass through extreme uncertainty. One day, suddenly, a strange and mysterious shadowy figure appeared outside their house, the same one little Ruth had constantly seen walking quickly past the window on stormy, rainy nights. But while this sight had previously been visible only to Ruth, that terrifying shadow now began appearing before the rest of the family as well. Sensing danger, Jason quickly sealed all the doors and window curtains in the house completely, so that the shadow outside couldn't detect their presence inside in any way. Though drawing the curtains temporarily avoided the danger, how long could they survive on limited food and water? Jason fell into thought again. This time he put all his intelligence and creativity to use, building a special mechanical trap or hunting device from wood, wire and other materials found in the house, one that could be used to catch animals outside. But the main question was, with the house completely sealed on all sides, how would he send this device outside? That's when Jason remembered the chimney again. Using the chimney's passage, he managed, with great difficulty, to send the trap outside. When the device was set outside, some wild animals began approaching, drawn by the scent. But on the first attempt, the device didn't work properly. Jason didn't give up. He repeatedly pulled the trap back inside, corrected its flaws and sent it out again. After several attempts, the device finally became completely flawless and functional. Suddenly, a wild animal got caught in the trap. This small catch felt to Jason like witnessing an enormous success. For a family trapped in such extreme confinement, this small achievement brought a flood of joy. After a long time, Jason, Anne, Graham and Ruth ate a hearty, protein-rich meal, and for a moment, genuine smiles of satisfaction appeared on their grief-stricken faces. Now they understood just how precious the true joy of survival really was. They began searching for new ways to keep living. Since food was the primary means of survival, they began pulling up the wooden floorboards of the house one by one. In contact with the fertile soil beneath the wood, they planted some vegetable seeds, hoping for a new and beautiful future. Meanwhile, as more time passed with no sign of human activity outside, the entire city's power supply suddenly cut off. Though everything plunged into a dark, fearful state, it didn't affect Jason's family much, because they had already survived crises and terrors far greater than this. 3 years passed, and little Graham and Ruth gradually grew older. Then 2 more years passed. Jason and Anne's children were now considerably grown up, but their behavior and temperament had become somewhat wild and uncontrolled. Normally, at their age, they should have been experiencing the outside world's light and air, becoming familiar with changing weather, and spending joyful days with friends their own age. Instead, they had spent that precious time trapped within 4 dark walls. And as a result of this prolonged mental imprisonment, their mental state took on such an unruly form. Meanwhile, as days went by, the weather outside grew even more terrifying and unfamiliar. Then one day, that bloodthirsty, shadowy figure reappeared. This time, it became clear that these ghostly, apparition-like beings were in fact some kind of terrifying monster that hunted humans. Their form and presence were so grotesque that anyone who saw them would feel their soul tremble. Wherever the monster walked, the sticky saliva dripping from its body caused everything around it to freeze like poisonous salt, as if it were a cursed man-eating demon risen from the depths of the ocean. The moment they sensed the shadow and presence of the monster, Jason, Anne, and the children hid in a secret corner of the house. A long, breathless, and terrifying game of hide-and-seek followed. The sound of everyone's breathing inside the house seemed to stop entirely. After facing death at every moment, the monster finally left, having found no trace of any human inside the house. But the clouds of danger never seemed to clear. Some time after this incident, Jason's mechanical hunting trap caught another unknown wild animal. When the creature was brought inside through the chimney passage, Ruth, now grown older, insisted that they wouldn't kill it. Instead, they would raise it as a pet. But the moment they tried to take it out of the cage, the wild animal turned vicious and bit down hard on Ruth's hand. This sudden carelessness quickly turned into a severe crisis. The strange animal's poisonous saliva and bite carried an unknown, dangerous bacterial infection, and Jason's fear proved true. Within just a few hours, Ruth was struck by a high fever and became severely ill. The limited medical care available in the house did nothing to improve her condition. Faced with his daughter's life and death crisis, Jason became almost desperate, frantic, and nearly out of his mind. But Jason wasn't one to give up. With no other option, he quickly went into the garage and got into his car. Starting the engine and putting it into full speed gear, he began ramming the sealed wall with tremendous force, again and again. Despite repeated, powerful collisions, the house's bulletproof wall suffered not the slightest damage, but the car itself was crushed and mangled into wreckage. However, the constant back-and-forth motion and intense vibration caused a fine crack to appear in the garage floor, which caught Jason's eye. At that very moment, a new ray of hope flashed through Jason's mind. Their neighbor was an experienced doctor, and if they could somehow reach his house, they might be able to get proper treatment and medicine for Ruth. Seeing the crack in the floor, Jason realized that there must be an old drainage pipe or sewer line beneath the floor, whose erosion had caused the crack to form when struck. With all other paths blocked, Jason wasted no time. He took a heavy hammer and began striking blindly again and again at the crack in the floor. His desperate effort finally succeeded, breaking through the concrete and revealing an open drain passage below. But the opening inside the drain was so narrow that there was no way Jason's large body could fit through it. So, out of necessity, his wife Anne, carrying a waterproof light, descended into the dark, narrow, and dangerous drain passage. Along the way, passing very carefully through an old, precarious, collapsed wall, Anne finally made her way through the doctor's garage and into his house. But upon arriving, the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. Inside the doctor's house, she saw a horrifying sight and stood frozen in shock. There was no living presence of the doctor there, only his decomposed skeleton and bones lying on the floor. The scene made it clear that, right at the very beginning of this great catastrophe, the doctor had died alone, in tragic solitude. Standing there, Anne fell into deep thought, but suddenly dark clouds covered the sky outside once more, and that strange, mysterious rain began pouring down again. Just then, piercing through the sound of the rain, the grotesque monster arrived. Using her own wits, Anne managed to evade the monster and found the necessary antibiotics in an old first aid box in the doctor's house. Then, through the same dark, narrow drain, she made her way back home with tremendous difficulty. Once home, Anne quickly gave the antibiotics to Ruth. Within a short time, Ruth gradually began to recover. With their daughter's life saved, Jason and Anne were overwhelmed with joy. But this joy didn't last long. Jason realized that the monster now knew the exact location of their house, and that it would attack them again and again. So, without wasting any more time, the entire family gathered all the heavy items and iron tools in the house, and with great effort built a powerful trap, so that if the monster entered the house, it could be captured. A few days later, suddenly, an extremely heavy rain began, and water started gushing into the house through the mouth of the chimney. Since the house was completely sealed on all sides, the water had nowhere to escape. Gradually, the water inside the house rose up to chest level. On one side was the fear of drowning, on the other, the monster's terrifying roar at the door. The entire family trembled in absolute terror. At that critical, poisonous moment, the monstrous man-eating demon shattered the hardened window glass and attacked, breaking into the house. The attack was so ferocious that they had given up all hope of survival. But in this extremely tense situation, Jason's son Graham, risking his own life, managed after great effort to trap the monster in the device they had built beforehand. Everyone then quickly fled to the adjoining room, but the monster possessed such immense strength that it began breaking free of the chains and the trap. Jason then took up a sharp sword and stood his ground to resist. But at one point during the struggle, looking into the monster's eyes, Jason's misconception shattered. He realized that the monster wasn't actually trying to harm them. If it had wanted to, it could have killed the entire family in an instant. Jason understood that, despite its grotesque appearance from the outside, these beings weren't actually attackers. Rather, they had repeatedly come to humans seeking protection from some unseen danger. Shedding all the fear and terror within him, Jason decided to place his final trust in his own instincts. He took up a sharp knife and cut away all the bindings holding the monster. The moment the monster was freed, miraculously, all the sealed doors and windows of the house automatically opened. Feeling the touch of free air, Jason, Anne, Graham, and Ruth stepped outside the house with immense joy. But the moment they stepped outside, their eyes widened in shock. They saw that all around them, not just one, but thousands of such monsters stood calmly. The entire environment took on a tense, eerie atmosphere, but this terror lasted only a few moments. Suddenly, breaking through the dark clouds in the sky, a golden sun rose, spreading rays of liberation. This sun wasn't just illuminating the earth, it was signaling a new, beautiful future for these surviving people. Within moments, the entire environment filled with a strange sense of peace. The family then made their way through a dense forest and climbed atop a tall, abandoned car to survey their surroundings. All around them now was nothing but water. The entire city had sunk beneath the water, transformed into a vast ocean. The city that 5 years ago had been bustling with human life was now silent, rendered mute by this great natural catastrophe. Having lost everything, they nevertheless began to dream once more of living anew. Boarding a wooden boat floating on the water, they set off across this new ocean toward an unknown destination. Now in their eyes there was only the dream of a fresh new life. Before them there was no longer any wall, no fear of being trapped within four walls. In their hearts now stirred an unyielding will to sail toward a new horizon, something they could never have imagined until now. Slowly, the boat moved forward, cutting through the ocean, and with this extraordinary survival science fiction story comes to an end. So viewers, if you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and stay with us. Goodbye.